So I'm going to talk a little bit about what I've done, how I got started, and some of the cool things that have happened to me throughout the years. So this is the beginning of my story. I was started when I was 12 years old. There, the picture on the left. That was my first ever survey with Colorado Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. I'll talk a little bit about them more later. But that was the first survey I ever got to do in Southeast Colorado, and we just tried to find as many reptiles and amphibians as possible through many different methods. And I was the kid out there with the butterfly net and the bags and trying to find all the things and take pictures with their little iPod and stuff. And so that's kind of how I got started, just having fun. And then after that, they liked that I was able to find cool things. I was adventurous, I was eager, I was passionate, and they started inviting me out to do a little bit more research with some of the private groups. So I got involved with Adaptation Environmental Services, and we started doing rattlesnake work, and they'd been doing it for a while. And I got to join in on the projects, and you can see in that picture on the right, it's a photo of me and some open space staff from the city of Boulder as we did surveys for rattlesnakes, and we tracked their movements throughout one of the open space properties to see where they were moving, where they were concentrated, and so that way we could figure out when they were going to build a trail, where to not put the trail. Unfortunately, this area, a lot of this property has been burned by the Cowwood fire now, but it was a great, super biodiverse area, and it was a really fun, awesome place to get a start. The next steps I took were I continued to be involved with Adaptation Environmental Services in COPARC, but then the following year I ended up doing a survey at Rabbit Mountain in Boulder County, kind of west of Longmont. And that's where I got to do a general herp survey throughout the whole year with adaptation. And we just tried to find as many things as possible and document them for the Boulder County Parks and Open Space, so that way they could figure out what was there. We also did rattlesnake tracking in conjunction with that, where we taped little radio transmitters around the rattlesnake's tails and tracked them around the park and figured out where areas of high use were. And then the photo on the right is, photo on the left, I should say, is from North Table Mountain in Golden. And we also did work on South Table Mountain the following year of tracking rattlesnakes up there. They're two very high use parks for Jefferson County open space. And so we wanted to see where the snakes were denning, where the snakes were going for mating, where the snakes were going for having their babies, and try and figure out how we can mitigate human wildlife conflict there. The photo on the right is from Rabbit Mountain in 2015. It's a photo of me and my good buddy Sean, who does a lot of the conservation work with me, with a giant prairie rattlesnake. I've gotten a lot of opportunities to work in some really cool states and have some really cool fun finds. So the photo up on the left is me in New Mexico in 2015. I've done a few different work sessions in New Mexico, but this one was really cool because I got to work with the National Park Service down there. And we did a herp survey at this newly acquired site that had never had any biological work done at it. And that was really fun. And on the right, top right, is a photo of a Central Plains Western milk snake that was actually a county record from an area that had been documented since the 1920s. People had been working there and trying to find stuff. And I happened to be the first one to find it there back in 2015 as part of one of their surveys. And I've done several surveys with them since. Bottom left is what's called a vine snake. And it was during some work I had with Arizona Fish and Game Department where I was able to go out to the very fringe of the species range and find this really cool animal. And then the bottom right is a black-necked garter snake from Colorado. They're super common throughout a lot of their range, but in Colorado, these are guys we put in a lot of survey effort for because they're super cryptic and they're a keystone species and monitoring species that we want to keep track of because they show the impacts that bullfrogs can have on a lot of the ecosystems. Through a lot of the work I've gotten to do, I've made a lot of connections and gotten to work with a lot of groups. So here's just a list of some of the groups that I've gotten to work with or partner with throughout some of the work. So I've got everything from universities to fish and game departments to parks and open space on numerous different levels. Got work at the federal level, got work for the state, just anything and everything. And there's plenty of opportunities out there. You just kind of have to work for them and make the right connections and they will start showing up out of the woodwork. And you'll have so many to choose from that it's hard to pick. They're all really fun. And there's the picture on the bottom right, it's me working with a grad student from UNC on some of the work they were doing with rattlesnake venom analysis. So here's some of the highlights that I've had from my time. I worked with COPARC, as I said, and I'll explain it a little bit. But one of the surveys I was a part of, I was the lead observer for documenting species of reptiles and amphibians in Southeast Colorado. And on that survey, it was really awesome because we got to document over 330 different individual animals, which is huge, and 42 species. We only missed one species of reptile and amphibian that occurs in that part of Colorado. And it's great data because it's never really been collected before, and it's super important as they put more roads through, as they continue to develop it, as ranching changes, as agriculture changes, to be able to have an idea of what was there and how common it was. So that was a really cool, fun thing to be a part of. I also I was part of a team, and I actually found the largest prairie rattlesnake that's ever been documented in Colorado. It's a picture of me on the right holding it in a rattlesnake tube. It was at 52 inches, and that's the biggest they've ever been documented in Colorado. And the largest ever is 59 inches. I've also been able to be privileged to find every single turtle and lizard species in the state of Colorado and document it so that CPW has at least recent data on occurrences and where they've been found and when they've been found. The only things I'm missing are 2 species of amphibian and 5 snake species. And once I find those, I'll found every single species native to Colorado in Colorado. And hopefully that'll give CPW an idea of at least some general idea on their occurrence. I've also been privileged this past year in 2020 to have a lot of opportunities to document county records and range extensions of species. Colorado doesn't get a lot of interest in reptiles and amphibians, even though it really should. We don't have a state herpetologist or anything like that. So a lot of the work has to be done through people like me that want to volunteer our time to go out and do these kinds of things. So this year I got to publish, and I'm in the process of publishing a total of 8 county records and range extensions, which hasn't been done. That many haven't been found since probably the early 1990s. So it's pretty significant finds for Colorado to still have that many undiscovered reptiles and amphibians in different places. The bottom right is a photo of a Colorado checkered whiptail. It's an endemic species to Colorado, only known from like 3 counties. And I found it in a 4th county, which was really cool and exciting. The other one's a Great Plains toad on the left, really cryptic species that people don't get to observe a lot, and we found that in a new county as well. Same thing with these 2 individuals. The one on the right is actually really important because it's a plateau striped whiptail, and they are a parthenogenic species, meaning they can breed on their own. They're all females, and this is likely a translocated population into a new county and a new range that is potential to have negative effects on the other whiptails in the area. So it's going to be a really interesting species to watch and a really fun thing to document. On the left is the Prowers County record of the smooth softshell turtle, which is a really big find for Colorado. This is the only individual known from that area to date, and the only individual known, if anyone knows Southeast Colorado, the Arkansas River is dammed by John Martin Reservoir. It's the only one found on the eastern side of that dam. So it's a really significant find, but there's only been a handful of those turtles found in the state. The other one is, I was helped document the furthest west that the eastern hognose has ever been found in Colorado, and only the 2nd live individual. This was on a Colorado Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation survey. We were trying to document this species, and we were incredibly successful, and it was a really awesome opportunity. And then the last one was also on a Colorado Partners Amphibian and Reptile Conservation survey, where I was able to be the first person to document the smooth softshell turtle in the state of Colorado. And prior to this discovery, Colorado only had 5 species of native turtle. Now it has 6, and I got to publish it, write it up, and document a new species, all because of just looking into these fun little opportunities that I thought were good to build a resume with, and that I enjoyed, and ended up coming out with some really cool publications that were as a result. And like I said, take the opportunities you have. If you guys ever get any chances to participate in citizen science, BioBlitzes, anything, you will make some of the best friends of your life. These are people that share the same passion for wildlife that you do. And honestly, there's not much more that can be said about how strong that is. That whole group of people in that room I still talk to. We're still all good friends. That's my best friend in the bottom left that I met because of this hobby. It's super fun. It's a great thing to do to get involved with wildlife conservation, even if it's a little unique. So there's my quick little spiel about just a little bit of what I've done. I hope that you guys kind of see there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of cool things that you can do, even if you have a weird, unique interest like reptiles and amphibians. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shoot. Otherwise, thank you guys for listening and hope you enjoyed.
Give a few minutes to answer any questions anyone has. I have one, Hunter. What are some of the programs that people can use in everyday life to participate in citizen science?
Yeah, if you guys want to help at all with any sort of reptile and amphibian conservation, I mean, you don't even have to know anything about it. A big thing you can do is use iNaturalist. That's a very wide, diverse citizen science documentation base that if you're outside and you just see a snake crossing a path, get a quick picture of it, put it on there, and I'll identify it. I'm one of the top identifiers for reptiles and amphibians in Colorado. So just all you have to do is throw a picture of it on there with a good location and we'll get it squared away and you're helping citizen science. Another thing is I will try and let Remy know if there's opportunities to get involved with any bio blitzes, anything like that. And they're great opportunities, even if you don't like snakes, if you're not comfortable with snakes, any of that, it's a great chance to learn with a lot of professionals that know what they're doing and enjoy what we're doing. So.
Yeah, I've actually got my COPARC shirt on right now, but I've got the sweater stuff.
Yeah. And so, like I said, it's a great opportunity to meet great people. That's how Remy and I got hooked up and started talking and built a friendship and built a working relationship as well. And you know, it's a really fun group of people, COPARC, and any of these groups are. So I highly recommend looking into them, even if it's not really your thing now. It might be. You never know. So.
Sure. So yeah, if after this meeting, if anyone realizes I might want to be part of COPARC, I'm also, can send that info. So yeah. So with that, we'll move on to Dakota, who is going to talk about his time interning military bases. So yeah, you should be able to just select the share screen option, Dakota. See if that works.
See it.
All right. Sweet. All right. And I'll leave it to you.
Just full screen?
Yeah.
I feel like all the presenters at our classroom now. All right. There's no way I can follow up Hunter. That was absolutely awesome. This is something that's a little more attainable in the near future, I guess, rather than finding every herpetile in the state. But yeah, I'm going to share my experience about an awesome internship experience I had in Washington before I made it over here. I want to get started with a little bit about me. I haven't met anybody here except for Remy, maybe a few people in class, but that's about it. I'm from Houston, Texas, Cowboys fan, even though they suck this year. I like hockey, snowboarding, hiking, golfing, all the stuff outside, pretty much. I was in the Army for 4.5 years, and that's where I'm coming from. And I got out in May, and I did this internship in winter from about November 2019 to like January 2020 this year. And so what it was basically a CSU like sponsored program that was in association with the base's Fish and Wildlife Service. JBLM stands for Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is Washington's Army and Air Force base. It's a good combo. And we did a whole bunch of ecology, wildlife management, and forestry tasks, mainly ecology, as you'll see when I go over my experience. And then it was basically any soldier with 4 months or less on their contract could do this, or students. We had a lot of students. It was a good half and half. And yeah, and then sometimes you could work individually with these people, the foresters or wildlife biologists. But unfortunately, it was a little more rare. It was more of group work. Yeah, so we mainly did ecology restoration. A lot of planting, as you can see here, planted different flowers, balsams, camas, lomatiums for Taylor checker spot butterflies, which is a rare species and protected species in Washington. And something the base was really looking to get back. It was probably their #1 project, was to get these butterflies back in the swaths that they used to be. We would spray a lot of invasive plants like some clovers, Scotch broom. And the cool thing about that was, essentially you had this experience to almost get a certification for spraying, which some people consider a foothold into this industry, especially if you're doing ecology. And they would even give that opportunity sometimes to pay for that certification test. We also planted oaks. A lot of species in the area relied on oaks. I guess something important to note on here too is that Washington, especially the base JBLM, was home to like 90% of the natural prairies. And okay, I said that word. JBLM was home to 90% or so of the remaining prairie habitats in Washington. So it was really important to do a lot of this ecology restoration and protect the remaining prairies that the state had. And one of the things that was lacking was oak stands for species that relied on them, like obligate species, which there weren't very many, but either way, the oaks had diminished based due to the homesteaders that lived on base a long time before the base was really erected, and then also training by the soldiers. We also did fire prep. That was a big thing because they do prescribed burns in the summer. And basically, if you went to the program during the summer, you could use a drip torch and start a fire and control it and burn grids at a time. And mainly, again, for invasive plant species removal. That was kind of the big thing out there. Other fun tasks, and the most fun tasks, is you actually got to see wildlife here. Amphibian, salmon, and bluebird box surveys. Amphibian surveys were going out and looking for egg masses in the water with waders and identifying the egg masses to see what amphibians were in the area. Salmon, we were out there with some polarized glasses looking for reds and salmon and trying to spot and identify between the 3 different species. Surveyed a plot of forest for owl nests. Basically, a forestry service was going to come down and cut a whole bunch of trees. So we were making sure there were no protected owl species that were nesting in the area. Didn't find anything, just walked through the woods all day, but pretty fun, I guess. We also felled some trees. That was probably one of my favorite parts, just chopping some trees down. And then we also went on field trips. I went to the Oregon Zoo. Nothing as cool as Remy and working at the zoo for like 6 years, but it's still pretty fun to just get a little behind the scenes tour and pick up some plants for the Taylor checker spot butterfly because we were transporting them. And then just when we had free time, we would just go out and forage for mushrooms. So. And then these are some videos of the cool things. It's a flamethrower during fire prep. They had it attached to an ATV. Did not get to use it, got to watch it a few times. That's about it. Falling some trees. And a salmon ladder on base. There's a lot of controversy about that salmon ladder too, which is pretty fun. And it engaged you to the idea of interacting with the government. And just because wildlife biologists say, hey, this is the smartest thing to do, doesn't mean that the government says, no, we don't find it worth it. Because of it, they had to shut this down, unfortunately. All right, and these are just some pictures I took at the museum at a local university, and some of the mushrooms I found interesting. Tea-cap mushrooms are my favorite. They're the bottom, second to right. Some of the wildlife I spotted out there, not very much because it was a lot of ecology stuff, but when you're in the forest, you're bound to walk across some stuff. The top right is Washington State Amphibian, the tree. the coarse tree frog. And then things I learned, a lot about ecology and natural resource management, how departments function, how they interact with other departments. My internship leader had to give speeches to the base soldiers to tell them like, hey, pay attention to these animals out there. They're going to be there. And he would have to lay out like the environmental sanctions that the soldiers have. So just kind of understanding how departments and different organizations work with each other. History of the land and state, learned out there quite a bit, like Native American tribes in Washington had been doing prescribed fires for hundreds of years before European settlers ever made it. And that was why they had such a big burden of continuing those fires. Some biology facts like turgor pressure and tree girdling. I learned that this is the career field I want to be in. I was kind of struggling to decide what I wanted to go to school for coming out of the Army. I thought I wanted to do marketing. And then I was like, no, that'll probably be boring. And I did this internship and I was like, okay, this is awesome. Like, this is what I want to do. And honestly, like, this is probably the cruddiest part of it because it's the restoration part, which is like, I would consider hyped up landscape management for the animals. So to me, it was like the worst part, but it was also way better than anything I've done before. And it was totally what I want to do. How to spot and identify local salmon. Same thing with the amphibian egg masses. Exchange knowledge and experience with college kids, which was really cool for me, integrating getting back out of the Army and being a normal person and like not cursing every other word and stuff. And then the impact of invasive species, pretty much most of the work I did there was removal of invasive species or protecting endangered species and like increasing their habitat, and increasing the habitat for those endangered species and protected species was often removal of invasive species. So resume working experience or worthy experience. This is what I would consider like pretty concrete stuff, like more hard skills. Use a lot of power equipment, including driving a tractor. Herbicide experience, and like I said, you could even get a cert out of this from certain times. Tree and plug planting, local invasive plant species ID, and firefight experience that can lead to a red card. I didn't get to do this, but in the summer, this is pretty much all they focus on is firefighting and the prescribed fires. And basically what was really cool about this internship, and any internship you probably do, you're going to see how it actually like applies to your next job and get you another job. I got a job at a golf course, I'm pretty sure because of my power equipment use. So yeah, how you can get involved. These are all the bases that the Center for Environmental Management and Military Lands operates at. And I don't know if they have an internship at every program. And in fact, I can guarantee they don't. But they have jobs at all these positions or at all these places. And these are all the bases they are stationed at, I guess you could say. And they're run by CSU, sponsored by CSU, I guess you could say too. And basically you could contact them and get a position and maybe even get an internship down at the Air Force bases in Peterson and Cheyenne Mountain. So yeah, I hope y'all actually learned something from that. If you have any questions, I am free to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Dakota. I'll give a few minutes for any questions anyone might have. Well, working with military bases is something that not a lot of people think about, just because a lot of people think that a lot of those, like properties are closed off. But you'd be surprised how much work those bases go through for the sake of maintaining the environment, and whether it's they have to or they want to. Just a few examples in the state of Colorado. I know is the Air Force Academy down by Colorado Springs, or in Colorado Springs. They actually have a population. I don't know the exact species. I'm bad with smaller microfauna, but they have a species of jumping mouse that's actually, I think, state endangered, that resides on the property of the Air Force Base. And so they actually have some staff from here at CSU, from the Colorado Natural Heritage Program, who go over there and monitor and get data on them. And then we also have another program. I don't know if it's still going on. I don't know what the state of the program is, but they were going down to Fort Carson for a little bit. Someone by the name of Doug from CSU, who was working with checkered whiptail lizards. I forgot which species again, that were on Fort Carson property, and CSU students got to go out there. And so military bases are, I think, a fantastic way to build experience.
And something else I could add on to that too is that these bases still have the responsibility to follow the ESA and do like environmental impact statements. So they still get tasked with those duties. And then also they're kind of like the custodians of the land for military bases and the ranges. So they can kind of use that to their advantage to do a lot of protection and ecology restoration that otherwise they would not be allowed to do, just because they can claim it as like, oh, like we're just clearing some trees to help the soldiers maneuver better, whereas they're really like pushing back the edge of the forest to help some species. So it's kind of a really unique experience, and definitely somewhere else I would suggest for everybody to look for a job if you're ever finding yourself scarce of job opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So again, thank you, Dakota. Thanks a lot. That was a super interesting presentation. That was actually super neat. So thank you for speaking tonight. And now we will move on to our last speaker for tonight. It's going to be Brandon. And he's going to talk about a course that he's actually, a talk he's given in the past, which will be super informative and exciting. So I'll leave it to you, Brandon.
Sweet. Okay. Let me know if this works. It's the first time I'm ever doing like a presentation on Zoom, so I hope I do it right.
Yeah, Zoom's weird. I'm not used to it yet.
Okay.
But yeah.
Does it look right? Is it good?
Yeah, it's all good.
Okay, sweet. Hi, everybody. My name is Brandon. First up, I want to say a quick thank you so much to Dakota and to Hunter for co-presenting with me, because it's a lot of fun to do these sorts of things. I also want to call out Remy for butchering my last name, but no big deal. It's okay.
How do you pronounce it?
So my last name is pronounced Weigand, but it's misleading because it's spelled with a W, and I also don't look German at all. So I get it. It's completely cool. No worries. I am a second degree student at CSU. My first degree was in cognition, and now I'm kind of focused more on conservation efforts. But I've spent the last 10 years of my life working with dogs. I've worked in animal shelters. I've been a vet tech. I even had the privilege of managing a shelter for a long time. And so along that time, I've learned a lot about dogs, but the fascination, it's really funny to me because I kind of stumbled into the field. The truth of the matter is I always saw myself as a herpetologist. So I really connect with Hunter's presentation. So I stumbled into it, but as I kind of like learned everything and I started to especially working with the dogs, there's a lot of really cool connections that I started to see in learning more about wolves. So this presentation is basically a massively condensed version of a presentation that I have given many times and in many iterations. Normally this presentation can last up to 2 hours just because people are really fascinated by these things. So I'm gonna try my very best to get away with this in 15 minutes. So we'll see how it goes. I do have a very quick favor to ask everybody, and this is important because I used to be a dog trainer. Please save all the questions for the end. There's gonna be moments where you're gonna be like, hold on, wait a minute, I don't know, dude. But also, please try your hardest to refrain from asking me any dog training related questions. There are a lot in here that is going to touch very explicitly on dog training, but I don't practice dog training anymore. I'm like focusing all my efforts now on wildlife biology. But if you have any questions, if something along the presentation you're like, that's interesting, maybe I should consult someone, right? You're more than welcome to ask me, but I can't give you any training advice. I can, however, point you in the right direction of somebody who is going to be amazing at teaching you how to be a better dog owner. So yeah, let's get started. So today's presentation, the three main topics are probably the most frequently requested topics whenever I give this, and those have to do with domestication, dog and wolf body language, and aggression and dominance. The point really here is to show how weirdly similar, how like it's almost scary similar dogs and wolves are to each other. These three points are really good at kind of encapsulating everything that you want to know about dogs. But the greater point here is to say, well, there's way too many comparisons, like way too many similarities between wolves and our domesticated dogs, that it's kind of hard actually not to say that the dogs that we have in our homes are pretty much just friendlier wolves. And so there's, because of these crazy similarities, there's a lot that we can actually learn from just looking at our dogs about the natural histories of their wolf ancestors and their wolf sister taxa. And I always like to get some context for myself. Everybody raise your hand if you have a dog at home or if you're a roommate with somebody who has a dog. Yeah, I feel like most people, right? So there's, most of us have dogs at home, and it's really fun. You know, I don't know of anybody who hates dogs, but you know, I guess it could happen. For the most part, all of us, people are very much dog lovers. People love, you know, just being cuddled by dogs. I completely understand why. They're a lot of fun, but the benefit of domestication is that they really like humans now, which is great, right? But I often, as a dog trainer, I would often see a lot of misuse with certain words. The two most common ones were aggression and dominance, and that's why I want to end the presentation there, is so we can have a little bit more a more constructive conversation about what that means, and in turn, we can make you guys better dog owners or roommates of dogs.
Quickly
Yeah.
interrupt you.
Yes.
So I haven't gotten the message, but this is not a paid Zoom account. So there is a slight chance, and we've passed the 45-minute mark, but I haven't gotten the message. But we're probably fine. But just in case, if this call just cuts mid sentence, you can just join. I'll start the meeting again and just leave off from there, and we'll have another like free 45 minutes. But we've passed that mark now, so I think we're fine. But just to let you guys know, in case that happens, just restarting it, and we could go from there.
Completely, and it's a good heads up for me because I just like talking way too much, so I get it, I understand.
For sure.
Let's talk I think some people think this is boring, but I think it's really cool. So, you know, what's in a name? Let's talk about the actual taxonomic structure of where dogs come from. So, genetic evidence now shows us that basically all dogs, including Chihuahuas, toy terriers, Great Danes, bloodhounds, they all they most likely descend from a single Eurasian wolf ancestor, and that this ancestor is now extinct, but Canis lupus lupus, and this is the Canis is the family, and now all domestic dogs are kind of grouped into this one category called Canis lupus familiaris. The familiaris, I think, is kind of obvious why, right? All dogs, so all domesticated dogs, regardless of the breed, the size, et cetera, and I don't know, just as a fun side note, I have no idea how many actual breeds there are out there, but I know that it's over 2,000, and that makes me it keeps me up at night thinking like, oh my god, how did this happen, right? So how did we get from like one wolf into like more than 2,000 different breeds? So it's and we all loop them all together in the same familiaris category, right? So we're still debating a lot about what's going on with dogs and genetic history. We don't know too much. In fact, if there's one really big takeaway here, it's that scientists have no idea. We have no idea about the life histories of dogs. We really don't know too much about them. And in fact, we really didn't get started looking at even domestic dog behavior and genetics until maybe about 15 years ago, and now it's really kicked into high gear. So I assume we're going to see a lot more coming down the pipe. But the details of domestication are sadly equally as hazy, because we don't know how or when the domestication process for wolves really started. We have a good idea where, but how or when is really sketchy. So we probably, from fossil evidence, we can imagine that it took place the in between then and about 14,000 years ago. And the two fossils that we've seen, so there's one called the this is the earliest completely undisputed familiaris remains. So we know that at least 14,000 years ago, the domestication process had come to a point where the dogs as we see them today actually came into existence. But we also have one that stretches even back way farther into 33,500 years ago. This was found the skull was found in Siberia. But what was fascinating about this one is it didn't really match up with either wolves or domesticated dogs. But it's very clear that we're probably entering domestication at this point, but we're not quite to where we are with domestic dogs today. There's three main theories for how the domestication process really started. The first two are admittedly not very popular, although there's one movie that really took advantage of the first one. So the first one is wolves. Anybody seen the movie Alpha by chance? I guess a hunter-gatherer, right, who befriends a hurt wolf and they become. The likelihood of that actually happening is very low, only because if you've ever met a wild wolf before, two very large predators, who come into contact, very rarely do they actually want to interact with each other, right? The second one is hunters raising wolf pups. This one was popularized maybe a few years ago, actually, where it was suggested that hunters went into the caves of wolves to actually steal the wolf pups and then raise them as their own. There could be some credence to this. I think early humans probably recognized the hunting talents of wolves and were like, okay, let's take advantage of that. But not too much, not a lot of evidence really suggesting it. The third one, however, is probably the most popular and the most widely accepted. This is the idea called self-domestication, or the resource rating. Basically what this means is wolves kind of accidentally domesticated themselves because they lived on the peripheral edges of hunter-gatherer camps. And, hunter-gatherers would, eat things and discard the remains, and the wolves would just take advantage of it. And so over time, the wolves just learned, well, I get lots of free access to food, I get everything I need, and so I'm going to live in close proximity to humans. And so we've found several store raids where we've also seen wolf remains kind of thrown in. So there's some evidence for this, but at the end of the day, we have no idea. We have no idea what happened or where it started, or how it started. But we do know from genetic studies that the most likely source of the starting place was somewhere in Asia, just because Eurasian wolves, their natural range, but also in fossil evidence that came from the area. So regardless of how much we don't know about the domestication process or what happened, right? We do know, based on the sister taxa in modern wolves, that wolves and dogs are 99.9 genetically similar, and their physiology is nearly identical. And this is super important for later. They're also very, very largely scent-based. Dogs see with their nose. They have okay eyesight, but they see everything with their nose. Everything, their sensory information really comes from their sense of smell. And that has stayed the same. So wolves and dogs still have very similar capabilities and very strong capabilities. And lastly, that dogs and wolves are very heavily reliant on their own body language, but also for dogs in particular, dogs are very, very well attuned to human body language. They're incredibly good at reading body language, and they depend on it for everything to convey meaning and intent. Really the only things that have separated or justified separating them into their own familiaris category is just their change in diet, which, yeah, sure, there's some things that have retained. They can still eat certain things that wolves did, but also heightened survivability. This is the main one. So a willingness to be around humans, unlike gray wolves. So let's talk a little bit about the body language, because this really sets up everything for evolution and for aggression that we'll talk about in a second. So body language, as I said, is incredibly important for dogs. There are a lot of different individual body movements, signs, signals, but it's, I think at the end of the day too, remember, dogs don't talk to each other, right? Like they don't like bark at each other in like conversation. Dogs are very, very visual creatures, and that they depend on like the overall posture, right? Even a certain like leg in a certain position will have something, a meaning that's conveyed completely separately from, let's say, the left leg or the right leg, right? They're very, very particular about the kinds of movements that they do. And dogs and wolves are almost identical in actually how they use, is that they're basically the same. Like if you look at a dog and they do like a particular behavior, you can pretty much assume that if a wolf did the same one, they're talking about the same thing. So it's possible, I've seen videos of this where dogs and wolves will actually interact with each other and like completely understand what the other is trying to say. So it's pretty cool, right? So we rely heavily on speech and body language for sure, but in a dog's mind, 95% of their ability to communicate depends on body language. And some of the most popular examples of this are, of course, the wagging tail, but I am about to probably break down the misconception that a lot of people have about the wagging tail. I assume that most people think that the wagging tail means that they're friendly. I thought that for a long time. It actually turns out that wagging tail, yeah, it could mean happiness or a willingness to, excitement, right? But wagging tails have been seen in a lot of different like social contexts. Like wagging tail, I've seen a dog wag its tail right before it like viciously attacked another dog. Like I've seen the wagging tails in situations where it would otherwise not have, this dog was certainly not happy. So it's for everybody out there who sees a dog who's wagging their tail, it doesn't always mean that they're happy. And it's really important to know too, because at the dog park, it always stresses me out when people are like, oh, he's wagging his tail, he's friendly. Well, not really. At the end of the day, for me, a wagging tail is simply an invitation for some sort of social interaction. So when you come home, the other wagging their tail, like, oh yay, like I wanted to see you, cool. But they're also, the wagging tail could also signify to another dog in the context of body language that they're trying to say, hey, you need to go away. Like there's a lot that's conveyed in there. And the second one is kind of this little chihuahua here is doing both the wagging tail and the play bow. The play bow is when they kind of stretch like this. You see this a lot at dog parks. Your dog probably does this to you a lot. And this one is actually pretty consistent. That means that they're telling you, hey, I'm friendly, I'm happy, and I definitely want to play with you. And so every time you see your dog like kind of do what the chihuahua is doing, that is always a good sign. That means that they're ready to rock and roll with you. Now we get to the other ones. So ears tucked back and the low crouch, as you see in those two pictures, those are always when dogs are like a little uncomfortable, a little nervous. They don't know what you're doing. It is actually true that dogs don't like it when people hover, especially new people hover above them. They can't see them. They don't know what's going on. And so that's when they do that crouch. These kinds of like nervous behaviors are their way of telling you, hey, I'm uncomfortable, like, hey, get down to my level, or can you step back just a little bit so I can can I breathe for a second, And when you see these out in, if you're like walking down the street and you see a dog give you like the whale eyes, he's just telling you, hey, he's a little uncomfortable. So just to kind of modify your approach. And this chihuahua is a good example of what I'm going to talk about with meaning context, because body language context is critical. Yeah, we can look at the individual behaviors and be like, oh, that's a wagging tail and a play bow, right? But it is critical that we also look at the entire context surrounding these behaviors. When multiple behaviors are combined, right, that conveys something completely differently, right? Or if they're in a situation that calls for them to wag their tail or something, you need to look at everything. Never just assume that because you see one wagging tail that dog is happy. And this chihuahua is doing something what I always love to see, right? Not only is he wagging his tail, but he's also doing the play bow, which is a pretty good way of indicating that this dog is friendly, right? You have to look at everything kind of put together. Which brings us into the ideas of alpha and dominance and aggression. So I like to talk about alpha first because it is really easy to spell, and it is probably the word that I hear used most often. And as a personal favor to me, please stop using the word alpha. Alpha is a fun one because this is again with something we looked at with wolves. And in the 30s and 40s, there was a Swiss ethologist who was like, "Oh, look, it looks like dogs are with each other all the time. They're trying to establish dominance with each other, blah, blah, blah." And so he coined the term alpha. And it became so enduring that it now describes, for a lot of dog owners, any behavior that they don't understand, right? It's like, oh, well, that he's like peeing on the ground or something, he's alpha. Nothing could be really further from the truth, because when we look at now, so more modern studies of wolf behaviors, they actually show us that the what we think of as the alpha wolf is almost always like a parent. Like it's almost like a parent or a leader, or the wolf who is most likely to help protect the pack. It is very rare for within a social pack for two individual wolves to try and fight for like dominance. But more than that, we see that like these leader wolves, they're not trying to like consistently exert control. You know, like when you think of the word alpha, it kind of brings to mind like, oh, this like he's in charge, right? Like he's the one I have to listen to. But wolf packs don't exist like this. Wolf packs are very, very family focused, motivated to maintaining the overall health of the pack. It's incredibly counterintuitive for there to be a quote unquote alpha wolf. And in the same way, because we know there's so many similarities between dogs and wolves, there is no such thing as a alpha dog. So using the word is not only irresponsible sometimes, but it's also misleading. And I often see it as a way when people try to anthropomorphize the abilities of their dogs, right? Nothing could be further from the truth. Dominance is related. So to be fair, dominance is a real thing. However, it is not used in the way that we often attribute with alpha. So an alpha wolf doesn't exist. Neither does an alpha dog. I don't know if alpha humans exist. I don't necessarily care about that. But with wolves and dogs, just please try to use the word responsibly or not at all. Dominance follows the same sweep. The most common example I see of this is called the alpha roll. It's when like somebody will grab their dog and like throw them on the ground, or like hold their like legs, or like pin them down. These scare me because they oftentimes make the existing problems worse, but it also shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what you were trying to accomplish in the first place. So alpha rolls are not very ineffective. And I include this picture here of Cesar Millan because this particular clip of him made him famous for the wrong reasons. Because there was this poor lab who was getting cornered by him. She's terrified of him. He doesn't know, she has no idea what he's trying to do to her. And then she corners him, he tries to perform the alpha roll, and she bites him. It's almost unsurprising how that happened, considering that his idea of alpha terminology is not based in science, you know, like, yeah, what'd you expect, you know? But with wolves, when you see a wolf do this, like what you think of as the alpha roll to another wolf, they're not doing it as a way to establish dominance. They're almost always doing it as a way to teach that wolf what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. We see it often with younger wolves versus older wolves, right? Where like with even like a parent who's like, hey kid, you can't do that, right? Like, you're my child, I get it. Like, I'm technically like, I dominate over you, but let me show you what's really important. And that's what when wolves do this, the corrected behaviors, that's what they're trying to do. And it's never about force. I think that a lot of people kind of assume that like wolves are very forceful creatures, but they're not. They're very, very intelligent, and they're very, if I dare to say it, very emotional. And they have a great deal of empathy. And this brings us to the final topic.
Brandon. So yeah. Just quick before the next minute passes, I know there's probably a few of you who have to go at 7, but if you're free after 7, I urge you to stay for the end of this talk because it's actually super neat. And if you have any questions, he'll be answering them at the end. But for those of you who are going to dip at 7, just a little announcement about the next meeting. Our next meeting will be on November 3rd, where we will have Rick Knight, a former CSU Department of Natural Resources staff here. Rick Knight has been working with Colorado wildlife management for decades. He's if you've never talked to him, I've had the pleasure of talking to him. He's a fantastic dude. So hopefully we'll see some of you guys November 3rd for that talk. But if you are able to stay past 7, I highly urge it. It's not too much longer because you did say it was last time.
I promise. It's just 2 more slides. I promise. Yeah.
It's all good. But for those of you who have to go, that's when our next meeting is. And thank you for sticking this far. But back to you, Brandon.
So this is, I think, case in point. I talk too much. I get it. Sorry, it happens. Finally, let's talk about aggression, because I really dislike the way that most people use the word aggression when they talk about their dogs. As in the same way that that I consider it a personal favor for you to not ever use the word alpha ever. I also think that it's really critical for current dog owners to be more conscious about how they're using the phrase because this is particularly true as wildlife biology students. Aggression is a very specific kind of behavior, and I always see the word aggression being used to describe 1,000 different behaviors for dogs, even though it has really nothing to do with aggression. So aggression needs to be really define it for you is an animal exhibiting actions or behaviors that are intended to minimize or eliminate a threat, right? So this wolf over here, clearly something spooked him, or he's not really jiving with whatever is on the other side of that picture. This is technically a form of aggression, but it's really, we need to kind of split hairs just a little bit. So there are 2 forms of aggression that we see in dogs. One's called defensive aggression and one's called true aggression, just for lack of a better word. Problem 2 here is in English, we don't have, sadly, we don't have kind of like an in-between, like friendly, whatever, this needs to be an aggression, and I think there should be. Unfortunately, there's not. So true aggression is kind of like the closest thing that we can use to define the scary part of aggression. But both make like, hey, back off. But the context and the body language are very different between the 2. The first one's called the defensive aggression. And this is by far the most common form of aggression in dogs, but it's not something that they really like to engage in. I don't think any animal likes to engage in self-defense. So to help minimize cost, and especially on an energy level, dogs follow a very, very specific progression of body language movements to try and tell you, hey, what you're doing is not making me comfortable, and it ultimately winds up with a bite if something is not listening to them. So some examples of this that you'll see are like cornering a dog or attempting to physically hurt the dog, where they will follow this very sequential step. You will always see this, at least in normal, like well-socialized dogs. So this first dog in body language signaling, those ears go back, you see the whale eyes, they crouch down a little bit, right? They're telling you pretty clearly, hey, I don't know, but I'm kind of uncomfortable with you. And if you don't listen, then they start to bare teeth, then they start to snarl, then they start to lunge, and then finally, if all else fails, biting. I will note too, dogs do not want to bite. Biting is a very costly behavior in general. It's opening the door for their selves to be hurt. So when a dog jumps, that would be concerning. We'll talk about that in a second. But generally, defensive aggression like this is them just trying to tell you, I need you to like back off for a second. And it doesn't mean that just because a dog is snarling at you or baring teeth at you, it doesn't mean they're being mean. And I think that's the really common misconception. They're not being mean to you. They are very clearly trying to tell you that they're uncomfortable with something in their situation. Whenever you see a dog with baring teeth, then you need to step away for sure. But if you see a dog who's like crouching or like ears back, you definitely need to adjust something about your behavior with that dog. You need to either take a step back or just be like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to go over here and like do my own thing and let him kind of like calm down. It should never get to the point of biting. If a dog is biting someone, then you've got something much more serious, where the dog is like you didn't listen to me before with any of the other signals I was trying to tell you, so I had to revert to biting. And that, sadly, as an animal shelter employee, I saw that a lot. You know, I saw where owners just, they didn't know any better. You know, it happens. And so their dog would bite them all the time because they just weren't listening to them. But whenever we see any of these behaviors take place, we call it defensive. Generally, us in the animal welfare industry, we never like to affix that aggression to the word, to the term defensive, because we know how loaded the word aggression is. So we almost always say, oh, he's snarling because he's scared of me. That's defensive. So you'll often hear that from like a dog trainer or like an animal behaviorist. They just don't want to contort the two. And then finally, true aggression. True aggression is basically a form of it's a very clear form of aggression, but instead of having that clear sequence of like motions and behaviors, they skip it entirely. So where it's like true aggression can be categorized as an animal who just really wants to harm something else. Or it could be for a lot of different reasons, but the classic thing that we see here is a 0 to 60 mentality, where they're skipping those classic signs that I talked about before and going usually straight to biting. True aggression is incredibly rare, not just in dogs, but also in the animal kingdom, and for good reason. You can imagine in a social group, especially in wolves, an animal who displayed true aggression is not going to last long. Particularly when they need to cooperate, right? They have to understand the body language between each other. There's no way that they're gonna last long. And so true aggression, as a result, is not common in the animal kingdom, nor is it very common in dogs. In fact, in the 10 years that I've worked with dogs, I could probably count just on one hand how many I have witnessed in my life. Almost all of the other cases have been forms of defensive aggression, where we just had to modify a couple of things to help rehabilitate them. But I like to end things off not on a note about crazy, scary aggression, but on some more fun facts. Remy, tell me if it's too late or if I can go over these very quickly. So also fun facts. So dogs are not colorblind. They are and they're not at the same time. They can see colors, but they just can't see the same number of colors that we can. The most classic color that they can't see is green, which is why they love tennis balls, because when you start to outside on the grass, they can't see the color of the grass. It just appears. So the yellow pops up much clearly to them, and it allows them to target it. For the same reason, I definitely discourage anyone from using green tennis balls, because your dog will probably not find it. So droopy ears, like those that that you see in like or bloodhounds, those were actually developed they're not actually used to help trap the scent towards the nose, which makes them right. They're very scent-based creatures because they have really awesome adaptations, and those ears are one of them. Dogs can also to the sound. Like if you see a dog and they're just like, oh, la, 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 I'm just being a dog, and they like immediately turn to like cease to like they like hear something, they can turn almost in the exact direction of whatever it is that they are hearing, and they will almost always orient. Pointers are a good example of this, where they'll do that, and they'll freeze. It's their signal to you, like, hey, there's a duck over there, like go get it, you know. Also, dogs can generally see better at night. It's just the structure and the membranes in their eyes. There's the picture right here is technically a night vision picture of what dogs can probably see at night. So not bad. I mean, their eyesight's not great, but it's good enough. And then finally, my favorite one, so the dog peeing on stuff. I think the jury is still out as to whether dogs pee on things to establish territory. I don't think anybody's really looked into that, because I don't think anybody really believes that anymore. I don't think that modern domesticated dogs have a need to establish a territory, particularly when most of them are altered anyway. So what the question was, well, you know, if they're peeing on things, what's it for, right? Well, it turns out that dogs peeing each other the function of this is like a social media account. they will pee on things, and their pee actually contains a great deal of information about that dog. Like for like, what did they eat that day? What mood were they in? Is this dog pregnant? Like is there another dog nearby that might be sick, right? They secrete such specific hormones that allows other dogs to kind of take cue in them. So whenever you see your dog like wildly sniffing another area where another dog's gone to the bathroom, it's because they want to know how another dog is doing. It's just like checking into Facebook, basically. And yeah, so with that concludes my super long dog wolf behavior presentation. And I absolutely want to take questions here, but just as one last reminder, please don't ask me any dog training related questions as it relates to your specific dog. But if you have any questions, please ask me.
Hey, we'll give a few minutes.
Also, I know it's a ton of information to throw at everyone, so I'm super happy to share this presentation if anybody wants it.
Sure. I've actually got this meeting recorded, and hopefully we'll post it on Facebook. Past 2 meetings, for some reason, the recording, like downloading into the hard drive of our other officer, Maddie, went kind of weird. I think it's on there, but it's not like uploading perfectly to our Google Drive, so we'll try to figure that out. But this one, my hard drive should be able to send that if anyone wants to go through that talk again. But with that, I want to thank everyone for coming to this meeting.
Yeah.
So Brandon, are these defensive behaviors that you were kind of walking through, are those, do other wild animals exhibit the same behaviors? So they kind of go through the same process of signaling?
Yeah, that's a good question. Canids do. So wolves, foxes, and coyotes, they all display these sorts of like the kind of sequential information. But it's I would be unsurprised if other forms of wildlife did this, just because of how costly it is to start biting things at will. I would hope that other animals would also do something similar, for sure.
Adding on to that, one very good example is rattlesnakes actually go through that process. So if you run into a rattlesnake, typically you won't see it because of how cryptic you are, but if you get too close, you'll hear it. And then usually what happens is if you get a little too close or you face them, then a lot of them, especially a lot of the prairie rattlesnakes, will try to get taller and angle themselves so they look more like there's more snake behind them than there actually is. And then before when they strike at you, most of those I say most, like don't try it out because you never know, but they're actually gonna be headbutts and then dry bites. And then if they really feel like it's life-threatening, then envenomation happens, because venom is super expensive. It's their only way of getting food. It takes a long while to make that, and it's expensive. So rattlesnakes are another species or group of animals that go through that process. And it's cool to compare them because they're so different biologically.
I mean, I'd argue humans do this too. Humans have a method of self-defense that's largely gesture-based. We don't want to. We never want to get to the point of actually expending a great deal of our energy and resources into trying to defend ourselves, right?
So you said that like dogs will typically they do not bite unless it's for like a very specific reason. Mm-hmm. So like, why do some dogs just like seemingly randomly just randomly chomp on things?
Yeah, totally. It's one of the mysteries, honestly, that we often saw in animal shelters. Here's where we kind of have to bring in the nurture versus nature argument. A lot of the small amount of truly aggressive animals that I saw, almost all of them came from situations where one was my least favorite of the bunch. He was prescribed a wrong medication by a vet, and it actually warped his mind to such a degree that he became aggressive. But he's as the only exception to the rule. The other ones that I encountered were almost always socialized incorrectly or dangerously. But I would often, I would look at this too, and some dogs are just more susceptible to that kind of socialization, unfortunately. So I think there's definitely a nurture versus nature element. I wish I could answer the question entirely and absolutely. The problem with that is that every dog is an individual, just like humans, and every context is super important to understand. So if you see a dog biting something, yeah, it's concerning, but my deeper question is what's going on around them? Like, why is that animal feeling the need to bite so randomly? Does that help?
Yeah, I just like, it doesn't like, my dog is really, back home is really, really, really weird. And like, it's not like aggressive. He'll just like, I'll just be sitting and he'll just come over and just like it doesn't hurt. He'll just like bite my arm for no reason.
Oh,
Like that's like a greeting, and I'm like, what are you doing, dude?
What you're describing is not, it's not actually biting. And it doesn't, that behavior is almost always a learned behavior. That is, it's a play gesture. They mean well when they do it. It just looks like, what are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, he's a goofy boy.
Yeah, for sure.
He just does things.
Oh yeah, all of our dogs have some quirks, but then again, don't us humans have quirks too?
Yeah, I have an animal mystery. Maybe you can help out.
Sure, let's go for it.
So my girlfriend's dog, right? I was living at her place for over a year. Dog loved me. I love the dog, right? And all of a sudden the dog starts hiding her ears back, right? And like whimpering and like being scared of me and just me. And then it would like go away.
Yeah.
It would happen for like a week. And then it came back. It happened twice. Just no clue why. Nothing happened. Didn't accidentally hurt the dog.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere, the dog's just scared again.
Yeah.
What would you think happened? Yeah.
I love it when people say, oh, he was abused, oh, he was hurt in past life. I got to tell you, as an animal shelter employee for so long, very rarely was this an actual problem. The reality is that, and going back to what I said before, all dogs are individual. Some dogs just have certain aversions to people. Were you wearing your beard when you met this dog?
No, I just grew it recently. So
what about the hat?
Maybe. Yeah, maybe it was something I was wearing, huh? Like maybe I went outside. I was working that internship I gave a mediocre speech about, and probably had, different smells on me. So maybe that could have been it, right? Like maybe poop or...
When it comes to like having foreign smells, very rarely does a dog take offense to that. In fact, they're curious about it. They're like, they smell something, like, what is that? What do you have on you? And
it could have been the hat. I wasn't a big hat wearer. About a year, and I go through cycles with hats. It's really weird.
In the same way that, again, humans have quirks. Some dogs just have certain quirks. My advice to you in going forward is to just don't try to pet the dog. Like, let the dog come to you.
When that happens.
Yes, yeah. When it happens, like, oh, you know what? I get you, girl. Like, I'm just gonna go over here and do my thing. This is important too. There is no need for anybody to touch another dog. There is never a need for someone to interact with a dog when they first meet them. My general rule when I first meet a new dog is I oftentimes ignore them. Unless the dog is giving me very clear body language that it's like, hey, like, I'm happy to see you. I very interact like for the very first time, because I think when they first see a new person, they're just like, I need to get the whole story first. I need to understand what you're about. Unless it's just like labs for some reason. Labs are almost always the opposite of that, where they will love you no matter what you do to them.
This was a black lab, so definitely.
Okay, so every once in a while we get the exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
Did you get that?
No, it's been spotty.
Oh, you're good. How tall are you?
Just under 6 foot, 5'11".
Yeah. I would have personally. I think a dog trainer would need to see it to understand it. But any kind of whimpering is usually a sign that, like, you just give me some space and, like, let me. But that's the give dog owner is, like, when they first meet and let them do their thing, and they'll come eventually.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, mysteries.
Thanks.
Well, unless anyone has something really urging or like they need to know something, I think I'll call it here. We are 20 minutes past our usually scheduled time, but I want to thank Hunter already left. I think he had something going around 6:30, but I want to thank you, Brandon and Dakota, for speaking. These are really neat conversation topics and presentations, and so I'm very glad that you guys stood up and decided to speak here today. Hopefully we'll have more of these students of wildlife meetings in the future. I'd really like to, because I think it's fantastic to show off our members. But yeah, so thank you everyone who's still here for sticking around this long. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, next meeting is November 3rd, where we will have Rick Knight speaking, former CSU faculty. He's been working Colorado wildlife management for decades, and he has, I remember one time, just as a fundraiser, they had him sit down in the Natural Resources building in the common area just telling stories, and they just put a coffee table right next to there, and they sold like butt tons of coffee, which sucks because I was also coffee table manager at the time of our table back when we had one 30 feet away and no one bought my coffee. But it was fantastic. Rick Knight is I don't know exactly what he's talking about. I just know he's going to be talking, which is more than enough when it comes to that guy. So hopefully I see you guys then. Also, next meeting, I'm not going to get too into it because I'm still figuring out how it's going to work, but we are going to be announcing our election process and how that's going to work. And that'll be in late November whenever we host our officer elections for the chapter. But yeah, so for now, thank you for sticking around, and hopefully I see you guys around next week. Meeting.
Thank you guys.
All right, thank you. Nice meeting y'all.